Welcome back, everyone. This is the Revenue Governor. I am April, your host. And today we are starting something new, a series called Revenue Control Signal. These are the early indicators that revenue systems are drifting long before the number actually shows it. Now, in most organizations, you don't lose control all at once. You lose it quietly, in small moments, in conversations that feel normal, forecasts that sound reasonable, maybe even meetings everyone feels fine until it's not. Over the next several episodes, we are going to break down the signals that show up before performance drops, not after. What type of signals do most teams overlook, explain away, or just get used to? Maybe things like decisions that are getting revisited, standards that suddenly need explanations. Maybe pipelines are growing, but deal quality isn't. Confidence is probably increasing, but verification just quietly disappears. None of these feel urgent in the moment. That's why they're dangerous. And these aren't theoretical. If you've been in revenue leadership for more than 5 minutes, you have seen this. I mean, honestly, you've probably sat in a forecast call thinking, something about this sounds right. It just doesn't feel right. And then the meeting just kind of moves on because no one really wants to be the person who interrupts a confident room and asks, wait, can we actually prove any of this? I mean, I have been that person. In fact, I make it my mission. But that is where this series lives. Not in the obvious failures, in the moments right before them. So today we are starting with the first signal, forecast optimism without inspection. Most revenue leaders believe forecast problems begin when deals start to slip, but that is not actually where it starts. Forecast failure usually begins way earlier, when optimism begins to replace inspection. Pipelines are continuing to grow. Coverage, well, it looks good. The room feels confident. Managers sound like they're aligned. Everything feels like it's moving in the right direction, on the surface, that is, until someone asks a very specific question, a real one. What conversion rates are we actually assuming? How many of these deals have been inspected by a manager? How many opportunities contain clear buying signals? What are the buying signals? Versus just having good conversations and having optimism. Think about this for a second, because that's really where something subtle happens. When you ask a very specific question, the answers just start getting softer, less precise, more narrative even. There's more interpretation. That's the moment the system begins drifting. Not when the number actually misses, when the assumptions behind the number stop being verified. Let's talk about what this signal looks like in operational reality. This shows up inside real teams. You'll probably hear something like, your pipeline looks strong. Coverage is solid. The team feels confident. And none of those statements are wrong. That's not at all what I'm saying. But they are not specific. They don't tell you anything about the actual integrity of the forecast. Then someone tries to trace the math, and it gets harder than it should be. Deals are sitting in stages longer than expected. Conversion assumptions are unclear or undocumented. Managers rely on judgment instead of structured inspection. Pipeline reviews ultimately become conversational, not analytical. And instead of asking, what specifically changed inside this deal, the room starts discussing, how confident do we feel about it? At that point, the forecast just stops behaving like a measurement system, and instead it's behaving like a confidence system. And confidence, man, it's powerful. It spreads quickly, it lifts your energy, it makes the room feel productive. But confidence is not evidence. The signal is easy to miss because optimism feels like progress. Pipeline growth looks like momentum. A positive forecast call feels like alignment. No one wants to disrupt that. And if we're being honest, no one wants to be the person who turns the confident meeting into a math problem. So the meetings just continue. The tones, they stay positive. The numbers stay intact. The inspection quietly fades. This usually isn't a leadership failure. It's a leadership drift. Leaders get busy, but you know what? Part of being a leader is being busy and managing different things simultaneously. Your job as a leader is to require discipline. It's to require you slowing down and making sure everything is accurate. It requires you asking questions that not everyone enjoys answering, because optimism, quite the opposite, it's easier. Optimism gets agreement. Inspection, though, Inspection creates tension. Greatness is built from tension, and most organizations over time, they drift sadly towards what's easier to maintain. Now, how the pattern spreads. Let's talk about it. Once inspection begins to decline, that pattern spreads really quickly. It spreads predictably. First, deals begin advancing with less verification. Next, those pipeline reviews, they're losing structure. The forecast confidence begins to increase even though deal quality hasn't actually improved, and reps, well, they adapt really fast. They learn what the system responds to. If that narrative works, they prepare that narrative. If confidence is accepted, they deliver confidence. Instead of preparing inspection-ready deal updates, they prepare confidence updates. Leadership adapts to that too. Numbers start getting adjusted based on instinct, not inspection. And at that point, governance is no longer operating through the system. It's operating through interpretation. And interpretation, that always drifts, right? Because your reality is different from mine. So what happens next? Once inspection disappears, the impact starts building beneath the surface. Quietly, though. Deal stages are beginning to stretch. Late stage opportunities are starting to slip. Conversion assumptions are changing, but nobody is documenting why. So forecast adjustments begin happening behind the scenes. Leaders are starting to recalibrate numbers based on instinct. They're trying to balance what feels right. And none of this looks dramatic at first. The forecast, it's still achievable. Pipeline still looks healthy. The team still feels confident. I mean, think about this. You have your Monday meetings, you talk with your team, everyone is ready to go. Then what happens? Mid-month, you realize nothing is getting done, you're nowhere near your number, and changes need to happen fast. The structure supporting the forecast is already weakening. By the time the quarter breaks, the signal has usually been present for weeks, sometimes even months. Forecast failure rarely begins when the number misses. It begins when optimism is accepted without inspection. Now, when confidence replaces verification, that narrative replaces analysis. And that is why forecast optimism without inspection is the first signal in the revenue control signals framework. Not because it's loud, it's actually quiet. And quiet signals are the ones organizations ignore the longest, until the quarter forces everyone to notice. Forecast failure rarely begins when the number misses. It begins the moment optimism replaces inspection. Until next time.